This video is going to review questions focused on whether a regression model is actually a good model to use. Our data here is displaying a random sample of AP Stats teachers who were asked to report the age and mileage of their vehicles. We have a regression output up top here. And although we don't need it for this question, let's just refresh on how we actually pull the equation out from that regression output. All right, this is going to be our equation. We get the y-intercept across from that constant. The slope is across from that explanatory variable. All right, and the variable that we're predicting, the response variable, make sure it has a hat. All right, we see on the bottom there the scatter plot showing the line of best fit, and then over here we have our residual plot. The first question that you may be asked when it comes to assessing a regression model is to interpret the R-squared. And the R-squared is telling us how good is this equation at predicting mileage. If we were to plug in the age of a car, are we going to get something that's close to the actual mileage, or are we going to get something that's way off? All right, so in other words, how much of the movement in mileage can be predicted by just the age of the car. So in our table, we see R-squared right here. There's another R-squared over here that says adjusted. We never want to use the adjusted. We can cross that one out and just ignore it. And when we interpret the R-squared, remember it's about explaining the variation in the y variable, the predicted variable. So we would say something like 83.7% of the variation in the mileage can be accounted for by the age of the car. Sometimes the wording switches around slightly, so some alternate wording, 83.7% of the variation in the mileage is explained by the model. Okay, so in other words, this equation, using that equation to plug in ages, is going to predict the mileage of the cars pretty accurately. The other question that you might be asked is the model appropriate? And for this, we're primarily looking at the residual plot. So I have our scatter plot and a residual plot here. And if you've forgotten what a residual plot is, it's just showing all the vertical distances from each of these points to the line of best fit. So that point that I just circled there is this one, right? It's above that line of best fit. All right, we see this one right here is really close to it, but it's below it. That's this guy right here. All right, so it's telling us the vertical distances of all these points. Here's another obvious one we can pick out. It's this one up here. All right, so is it appropriate when we look at that residual plot? We want to see something that's scattered. We don't want to see any pattern here whatsoever. All right, and we don't, so that's good. Yes, this model is appropriate. The residual plot is scattered and shows no pattern. And if you haven't already answered this as part of the question, it's good to include that R-squared interpretation in this answer as well.